Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Victoria Grzymek. I work for Public, an ecosystem firm for government technology, or short GovTech. And I have the pleasure to talk to Matthew Hodgson, technical co-founder of the Matrix.org Foundation today, about secure open source messaging for the public sector. Matthew, great to have you. And for our viewers out there, it would be fantastic if you could shortly introduce yourself and start with the very basics. What is Matrix and what is the Matrix.org Foundation?
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about Matrix. So I'm Matthew Hodgson. I'm the technical co-founder of Matrix and the project lead. And Matrix is an open source project that we created back in 2014 for secure decentralized communication. And the mission is basically to build the missing real-time encrypted communication layer of the internet. Because whilst we have the web on the net today as a way to exchange hypertext and to build web apps, there is no equivalent thing for instant messaging or VoIP, or even exchanging IoT data, fintech data, healthcare data, whatever it might happen to be. And so Matrix is our attempt, and a successful attempt, to go and build this missing building block so that people can exchange any kind of information in real time between organizations, between individuals, between companies, between governments, whatever it might happen to be. And the Matrix.org Foundation is a non-profit UK foundation that we established to act as the neutral guardian and custodian of the Matrix standard. A bit like the W3C exists to look after the World Wide Web, or the IETF exists to look after the internet, the Matrix Foundation exists to manage the governance of Matrix for the benefit of everybody building on top of it. So my role is I guess, as the project lead on the open source side. Also, my day job is some CEO and CTO at Element, which is the for-profit company that we established to hire the core Matrix team and fund our ability to continue to work on Matrix full-time.
Okay, perfect for this introduction. And that sounds like a very ambitious mission that you've embarked on. You just said that Matrix is all about exchanging information securely. And of course, it's mostly been used in the field of communications, right? And when we look at communication solutions, there's a plethora of solutions out there that each of us use every day. So for example, this Slack, Teams, WhatsApp, Signal, just to mention a few. What is it that makes Matrix different, and how would you actually, put Matrix in this landscape?
Sure. So obviously remote communication has become even more important than it ever was before over the last 18 months of the COVID pandemic. And even before that, we were seeing Slack and Teams, Zoom, etc., exploding in popularity. But there is a fundamental difference between these kind of centralized, proprietary, expensive solutions and it being just part of the core capability that the internet provides. One way of thinking of it is that if you are, say, communicating over Zoom, you are locked into that vendor. You can't talk to anybody else unless they're using Zoom. It is a proprietary product. You have no visibility on how it actually works, where the data is going, whether the company is lying to you about whether it's end-to-end encrypted or not, hypothetically. And from an ecosystem perspective, it's just fragmenting communication. Some people are on Zoom, some are on Hangouts, some are on WebEx, some are on Teams. None of them can talk to one another. Each of them is getting more and more locked into that particular company. And often these are large American companies who are not encrypting the data and are exporting it to Silicon Valley, and you have no control over how that data is used. And frankly, it becomes a massive security issue. It's a honeypot. If you are an attacker and you wanted to go and compromise a given organization, probably the best way to do so now is to go and access a Slack or a Teams and go and infiltrate the company like that. In fact, we saw with Electronic Arts about a month ago that somebody, an attacker, went and accessed their Slack and sat there and used it to infiltrate and get access to production and exfiltrate several $billion worth of intellectual property purely through the mechanism of the fact that Slack is not encrypted, and that it's pretty easy to go and grab somebody's password or an access token in this instance, and then steal all the data. So Matrix attempts to fix this by building a global network which is not controlled by any single player, just like the internet or the web or email is not controlled by any single player. So you can join the Matrix network, which is one of 76,000 deployments now, and it spans about 35 million users. And you can run your own server, or you can pick somebody who you trust to run the server for you. And then all of your communications, your conversations, your file transfers, whatever that data might happen to be, will be stored both in your server, but also shared with the servers of anybody else that you are talking to. So if I were talking to you, Victoria, on the public.io Matrix server, and I was on the matrix.org server, and I go and send a message through to you, that message is literally equally owned by the two organizations. So that even if matrix.org disappeared tomorrow, you would still have a copy of that conversation. It would be encrypted so that only your devices can read it. And we have effectively democratized communication. We have shifted control of power from some big tech Silicon Valley ad company through to being controlled by your actual company, your business, or you as an individual. So that is the fundamental crazy moonshot that we have successfully mounted to basically shift control back to Joe Public, or indeed governments or any other organization who need to have self-sovereignty and self-determination on something as important as how they communicate.
You just mentioned governments, right? We are speaking at the Creative Bureaucracy Festival today. So many of our viewers will actually come from the public sector. And actually in the last couple of years, Matrix has become a highly demanded solution in various public sector contexts. So for example, we see the French government using Matrix, the German Bundeswehr is using Matrix as the foundation of its BW messenger. And Matrix is also part of Dataport's Project Phoenix, just to mention a few of the high-level projects. What do you think makes Matrix so appealing to public sector clients?
So I have a dirty secret, which is that when we created Matrix, the very last thing that we expected was that it would be popular with governments, because as I said earlier, it's an almost subversive democratic system to go and empower individuals to have their own communication capability. But it turns out that the very first people in line to retake control of their communication from the likes of Microsoft and Google and Facebook were governments. Because, what actually happened with France is that the Ministry of Digital, DINSIC, now called DINUM, reached out via GitHub, that well-known sales channel, because the President Macron was enthusing about using Telegram and WhatsApp to go and run the communication for his party. And having come to power, that was now being used within the country itself, which is obviously a huge national security concern, given that Telegram is based in Russia and has some very interesting security properties, like it claims to be end-to-end encrypted, but it is not, unless you explicitly enable secret chats. And therefore, they wanted to understand how they could run a deployment themselves. So nowadays, we have 65 deployments, I believe, that we run with them, targeting 5.5 million public sector employees. And that spans all 16 ministries in France. And each one can run it in whatever environment they like. It could be private cloud or public cloud. It could be on-premise. They can apply whatever data retention policies they have, whatever antivirus policies they have. They just have complete self-determination over how each individual ministry works according to the needs of that IT department. Because the Ministry of the Army has slightly different requirements than the Ministry of Ecology, for instance. And this gives them the flexibility to use both and also be resilient to outages and operationally independent, so that if somebody does do something terrible to one ministry, the others can continue communicating independently. So it really is a perfect match. And likewise in Germany with the Bundeswehr, and most recently Gematik the Agency for Interoperable Healthcare in Germany, we've seen a perfect match for allowing the various different, I think 150,000 different healthcare organizations in Germany can now use Matrix as their secure way to communicate together without their having to hand all the data to any single given entity, take it outside of Germany and not have it end-to-end encrypted. Instead, it's all under the power and control of, in the end, the citizen or the healthcare provider.
Interesting, super exciting, and I'm sure this will resonate well with the people that are actually watching us talking here. Moving towards the end, let's look into the future a little. Of course, Matthew, you're an expert in the field. So what are, in your view, the most exciting trends and tools, perhaps also for creative bureaucrats out there in the field of communications and future of work? And perhaps you can combine that somehow with sort of your future outlook for Matrix and for the Matrix.org Foundation. What does the future hold?
Sure. I mean, one of the really interesting things is just end-to-end encryption by default. And that is a complete 180 of the traditional Google Drive or Microsoft OneDrive kind of mentality, where the service provider expects to be able to search, index, analyze, data mine, monetize your data. Whereas here, everything we have in Matrix, in a private context at least, is end-to-end encrypted. And there are a couple of very interesting projects that we can't talk about yet, but really show the way of the future, where people are storing files in Matrix as well as conversations. And suddenly you start to feel a kind of file share cloud storage capability emerging too. And then it's not a large leap to imagine that all of your data could end up being exchanged in this neutral, open, standards-based environment in an ecosystem with many different vendors, some of them the largest software companies in the world, some of them little startups building on top of Matrix, all going and operating on the same data layer. And it's really the read-write vision of the web that Tim Berners-Lee had when he created the web many years ago. The problem is the web got too successful too early, and everybody just used it for GeoCities and websites and web apps. You never got this kind of data exchange piece. But here we are, adding it only 30 years too late. And we see that just accelerating. Also, peer-to-peer Matrix will be a real game changer, allowing people to participate in Matrix without even needing to pick a server, without even needing internet access, because you can run the entire stack within an app on your phone, and so create spontaneous mesh networks and be resilient to network outages.
Perfect. Well, that brings us to an end already. Matthew, it's always inspiring to talk to you. And dear viewers, I hope that many of you have learned something in these minutes that we talked about, that you're interested in what Matrix.org is doing. And we hope that this has been useful to you. All the best, Matthew, and see you soon.
Great. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Bye. Tschüss.
Bye-bye. Thank you.